Hello, everyone, and welcome to our event on the European Super League. I am Mihaela Tarnowski, and the coordinator for multi-level regulation student projects, where we aim to just shed light on alternative dispute resolution issues. We are also connected with the global governance team, who is researching different issues relating to global governance. And so one of them is the creation of the European Super League and the implication that it has for the legal implication surrounding it, and some controversies about its creation, which we aim to address today through our event. And today we welcome our speakers, Mr. Rajesh Raval, who is the Vice President of the Hague University of Applied Sciences. We have Mr. Frank van Erken, who is a professor at the Hague University and the Utrecht University, teaching sport-related courses. And we have Ms. Vesela Stoilova, who is an alumni from the Hague University of Applied Sciences, from the law faculty, and who is now pursuing an LLM in international sports law at ICETE in Madrid. And as well, we have Mr. Baras Rakova, who is also pursuing the same LLM in international sports law in Madrid. And I would like to start this event by asking Mr. Sorry, just a second. Mr. Frank van Erken, if you could tell us more about what is the European Super League and what is its importance.
Yes, thank you. And well, very nice to see you all here. You could all have chosen to go to the beach now or to watch the first half of Scotland versus Czech Republic, but I'm happy that you are all here now. And also thanks to Professor Barbara Lauwers for organizing this and initiating this, as well as all the students that are involved. So thank you very much. Yeah, well, so you have actually two questions. The first one is, what is a Super League? And the second one is, what is its importance? Well, briefly, the end of April, we were all a bit surprised, I think, that 12 of Europe's leading football clubs announced that they had agreed to establish a new competition called the European Super League. And the idea was to have a competition comprised of 15 founders and 5 annual qualifiers. And this means that the Super League would be partly a so-called closed shop, right? So only 5 of the clubs of the 20-strong competition would enter based on a sporting achievement. The other 15 clubs, among the 12 that have announced the news, the so-called founding clubs, would have their participation guaranteed. And the plan was to play the games midweeks, and that all the clubs would remain in their domestic leagues. The project was going to be funded by the American bank JP Morgan for about what they say about 5 billion in total. And to play in this new competition, all the clubs would get a check for around 250 to 300 million to begin with per season. And then in the future, the expectation is that they would get 3 times as much money a season as they get from the Champions League. So you can understand that this was a very attractive idea for these clubs and their owners, because they have very expensive households and huge player salaries to be paid, huge transfer bills to be paid. And these clubs, in their own words, suffered very much from the pandemic, so they saw no other opportunity than to start their own league. And this all then leads to the second part of your question, Michaela. Why is this important? Well, first of all, the whole plan was a setup to rival the UEFA Champions League. So when these teams would break out or break away, it would have been the end of the Champions League as we know it. And also, this is also of a big importance, it would have placed a bomb under the governance of football as we know it, right? So the current football governance structure can be described as a pyramid with UEFA and FIFA at the top, at the summit. And these organizations, until now, can declare the rules of the game and for a large part make and divide the money that is mostly made by the FIFA World Cup, but also the UEFA Euros as they are organized right now, but also, of course, the Champions League, which is the biggest club competition in the world. And all these things would have been under pressure when the Super League would have been established. That's the first reason why it's important. The second reason is, like I said before, it would have been the introduction of a closed shop competition, which is a novelty in European sports. I mean, this is well known in American sports culture, but not so much in European sports culture. And it would have meant that clubs like Ajax, or my favorite PSV, or for instance Leicester, could not dream of winning or even participating at the highest club level anymore. And third and last reason that I will introduce here as a reason why it is important that we are talking about the Super League is that all of this would have affected the domestic leagues, right? So the incentives to qualify for the Super League would have vanished because of the closed shop competition. But also the financial gap between the Super League clubs and the rest would have become immense. And in the end, the competitive balance, so the excitement in the competition, would have gone away as well. So in my opinion, these three reasons made the UEFA and the fans, the players and the managers unite actually in their opposition against the Super League, arguing that they have to protect football. But the funny thing is, in my opinion, that this is the same argument that is also used by the founding clubs to create the Super League, to say that they do this because they want to protect football. So this in short, Michaela, I think is an answer to your first question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Van Aren. And given that some clubs are still holding into the idea of the Super League, for example, we have FC Barcelona, Real Madrid, and Juventus that would still like to pursue this project. I would like to ask Mr. Raval if you believe that this is the smartest way from them to tackle this situation, given the consequences that Mr. Van Aren just stated and the impact that it might have in the sports world.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the interesting things, of course, is that what Frank was suggesting is that what we saw was a sort of mix of different worlds that came together. We have the American sports model, because virtually all of the English clubs that were involved were actually owned by Americans, strong American ownership. Obviously, Chelsea and Man City not, and Tottenham slightly not, but they very much look at the American model. So it was the American model and Spanish ambition in Florentino, the president of Real Madrid. And the two clubs that are left, or three clubs that are left in there, are, of course, Real Madrid, Barcelona, and Juventus. And in effect, Real Madrid are never going to backtrack on this. That's the nature of Florentino. He's never going to backtrack, which means by default, Barcelona will not step out of it because they don't want to be left back out of it. The position of Juventus is quite interesting in this because they have already been threatened with expulsion. They have a love-hate relationship with the Italian football authorities because, of course, they had that scandal a few years back where they were relegated all the way down and then worked their way back up again. So they have a bit of a fractured relationship there. And one of the things that came out when this was all there was, of course, everybody was outspoken. And if I look at it purely from a Premier League perspective, the Premier League threatened to kick out the Big Six. They said that they weren't, they won't have them in the Premier League. Well, sadly for them, then the Premier League won't really be a Premier League, because if it's not with, and I'm an Arsenal fan, so I would love to say that they would miss us, but at this moment in time, they probably wouldn't. But they'd certainly miss Manchester United, Manchester City, Liverpool, Chelsea. It hurts me to say that, but they'd miss those four clubs and nobody would watch their league. So I wonder when we talk about consequences, and UEFA, a Champions League without these teams, it's also unthinkable. I think what is quite interesting is that the way in which the big clubs went about it and the way in which UEFA clashed with each other wasn't necessarily particularly well thought through. And that's where the reaction of that pyramid kicked into gear. But I do wonder, I mean, the English clubs have now been fined £20 million, which will affect them post-corona. Barcelona, Real Madrid and Juventus are still waiting to find out what their fate is with regard to the Champions League for next year. But you're not going to have a Champions League without them. So I'm not sure that's the problem. But we haven't heard the end of this. I don't think that we've heard the end of it. I think that they will go away, think about it, and find a maybe slightly different model. But Florentino doesn't just give up. And he has great frustrations in the Spanish league. So he's probably going to upset Europe with that as well. I have to say, I was worried when this seminar was planned at 3 o'clock. So I thought, damn it, there'll be a Euro game. And then I saw it's perfectly planned. It's Scotland. Who cares? As an Englishman, nobody wants to watch Scotland play anyway.
Thank you very much for your answer, Mr. Raval. I would ask the next question to Mr. Van Eren. As quoted on the THUAS website on our sports lectures, it's stated that in a society that is becoming increasingly diverse, the connecting role of sport is becoming more and more important. And so do you believe that the controversies that surround the creation of the Super League would be significant in a manner that it would influence the sport world in a way that it will not be as connecting as it should be? Or do you believe that rather because it would make the field so diverse in terms of sport competitions, it would bring about that connection even more?
Yeah, good question again. Well, let me say a few words first about the concept of connection, because what I meant with that quote on our website is that sport has the potential to connect people, right, on the pitch and offside the pitch. And in our research at THUAS, we study how sports potential can be harnessed. And currently, sorry, we focus on sport in super diverse neighborhoods, so actually on local level. But this Super League case makes us also aware of the connecting, but also the disconnecting role maybe of football at a global level. And I would like to say a few words on that, because first of all, it's important, I think, to distinguish two types of connection. First of all, you can talk about bonding, right? So bonding is about a stronger connection within a group, an existing group or community. And you can also talk about bridging, right? So this is bridging between social groups, social class, race, religion, or other important characteristics. And I think if I look back on the whole process of the Super League and the whole debate afterwards, we have seen both positive and negative effects on both types of connections, or both on bonding and bridging, in my opinion. So, for example, we've seen an amazing bond between fans, managers, and players, something that we haven't seen before, especially in England. And these stakeholders, they all found each other in the dislike, actually, in my opinion, of the wealthy owners and the rejection of the introduction of this non-European system of a closed shop competition. And I expect that this will have an effect on the representation of fans on board, right? So, for example, Chelsea already have announced that supporters will have a bigger say in their process, in the process of decision making in their club. So that's one of these issues. I think that if you talk about bonding and a positive effect of this whole idea of the Super League, this is one of the effects, I think. But at the same time, if we take a closer look at the fans that stood up against the Super League, I think we can analyze that they were merely so-called English domestic fans, right? These fans, they grew up with the local derbies and the romantic idea of a small club that eventually can be Europe's best. And to be honest, I'm one of those kind of supporters as well. But at the same time, what about the supporters, the fans overseas, right? The clubs, and especially the English clubs, but also Barcelona, also Real Madrid, also AC Milan, they invested a lot in extending their fan base in Asia, for example, right? And do those fans feel the same about the Super League as the domestic fans? I rather doubt that. And there are clear signs that there are many overseas fans that feel different about the Super League. And these fans will claim that they own the club as well, or the club is theirs as well, right? So, and that they will deserve a say as well. So does that lead to bridging between overseas fans and domestic fans? I would really doubt it. And so that also might lead to a distance, right, between various fan groups all around the world. And also to the question, for example, who will be representing the fans in Chelsea's board? Will that be domestic fans, or will that be overseas fans, or who? And both examples that I'm just giving you here in a nutshell, they represent some issues, in my opinion, that come with globalization as a whole. And in this case, the question actually is, are domestic fans more genuine supporters than overseas fans? And so maybe briefly to answer your question, is the Super League dividing or connecting or uniting people? I think it does both. That's from an academic perspective, that's very interesting to study, right? So I don't think the Super League is an example of how to unify or how to diversify, but it does both. If you take, for example, the case of the supporters, as I just mentioned.
Thank you very much for your answer. And now I think I would like to move to some legal questions. So I would like to ask Ms. Stoilova more about the legal implications surrounding the European Super League. For example, the UEFA stated that clubs involved in the European Super League would be banned from other football competitions, be they domestic, European, or international, and also that individual players would be banned from representing their national teams in international matches. But can legally UEFA or even FIFA or other football governing bodies prevent the creation of the European Super League regarding those restrictions on clubs and individual players?
Thank you for the lovely question. To begin with, I'd like to definitely say that in a question like that, in a situation like that, there's an interconnection between international regulations, supranational in the face of FIFA, UEFA, EU regulations, national regulations as well. But when I saw UEFA's announcement, UEFA's statement about banning players and clubs from participating both domestically and in UEFA competitions as well as national teams, at first I asked myself the question, how, on the basis of what? So I went clearly to FIFA statutes, and in there is actually a provision that allows UEFA to somewhat impose sanctions, FIFA as well, but it's a very broad, legally speaking, provision. When it comes to the UEFA statutes, they clearly prohibit organizing any sort of breakaway league, so to say, without this permission of UEFA. And I think the clubs could have definitely asked for UEFA's permission, but of course this is dreaming a bit too much. They would have probably not even gotten this permission, but they would have definitely spared themselves the legal basis for FIFA to initiate the disciplinary sanctions, which it initiated but now suspended. I think they maybe are not going to go through. I don't think they will actually end up sanctioning them and excluding them from UEFA club competitions, as these clubs are the top ones that participate, especially in the Champions League. But there's also another article that is 49 that states that UEFA is the only organizing body of any club competitions where member associations of UEFA participate. And we know that clubs are members of these member associations. And as you were previously pointing out, Mr. Roche, there's the pyramid structure in sports governing bodies and in football especially, where a decision of FIFA imposed onto a member association will then affect the club and as a sequence affect also clubs, players of these clubs. But the likelihood of survival of the Super League without the approval of UEFA, I think it's very little. And it is highly impossible, in my opinion, that they would actually go through, because it not only faces legal challenges from the sports governing body side, but also from EU law perspective, but that I'll get into a bit later, of course. And when considering the ban of these clubs from participating in UEFA club competitions, I don't think they will suffer, personally, the big clubs that much, because they were already going to turn their backs on the Champions League, for example, due to this tight schedule, them wanting to play Super League games in midweek, but then also having domestic championship games. And we all know how much it is already to play, let's say, a Champions League game on Thursday, and in some championships, there's games on Saturday, Sunday. That's very physically stressful on players, and then traveling wise as well is a very tight schedule. The most worrying part from UEFA's statement for me personally is the threat of banning players, because out of this whole charade, this whole chaos, the players were the one party with the least fault, I think. There's this relationship of contractual subordination, especially in states where football players are recognized as employees, not as self-employed people, where they are under the subordination of the employer. And they essentially play a very minimal role in the employer's greedy needs and greedy organizing of Super League behind their backs. And if sanctions are imposed on players, it will probably be the most unjust outcome. But also, interestingly enough, a lot of experts in the sector have stated, and I also agree with this position, that if UEFA is to actually go through and impose sanctions on players in some way, FIFA has a provision that may allow them to do so, but it's very broad and leaves a lot of room for interpretation. So if UEFA or FIFA are actually to impose sanctions on players, it will definitely give rise to legal questions when it comes to their internal market freedoms, their fundamental freedoms under EU law, the freedom of movement, the freedom to provide services, but also the restraints that will be imposed on trade within the EU. And also the European Parliament, I saw recently posted in their questions to be discussed, 2 questions are related to the compatibility of these threats to sanction players, clubs from participating domestically, internationally, and at UEFA level. Definitely an interesting question. I don't think legally the Super League can survive too long, both from the side of FIFA imposing sanctions, both from EU law perspective. but they can always attempt to go through with it. We'll see what happens after.
Thank you very much for your answer, Vesela. I would like to ask Ms. Stojkova as well, Ms. Strakova as well, because you just touched on these legal questions relating to the contracts between clubs and players, for example. And knowing that players usually want to just have more options in their career, or sometimes they switch clubs to just have those better options. I was wondering, how do you think the Super League will just impact this whole situation, and the market and the contracts between those clubs and players, if the clubs would be banned, for example, to participate in some of the well-established competitions? And as well, if you believe, Ms. Rakova, if there would be some interference with the free market principles if those individual players would be banned.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the questions. I think I will just continue in what Vesela just said, because it's all connected with the pyramid of sports and football in general. And the players are in the end on the bottom, because there's like association, club, and the player, which is under the employment contract in most of the countries, not in Czech Republic, unfortunately. But if I was thinking about the possible contractual questions, within the professional football contracts, I think the players, in the case they wouldn't agree with the Super League, could challenge several contractual questions. For example, I know that in Premier League, for example, the clubs are obliged to act within the rules laid down by Football Association, UEFA, FIFA, which they could get into breach of the contract. Then they could get in a breach of the contract within the question of bonuses, as some of the provisions within the contracts are connected to the bonuses of the players attending Premier League, Champions League, scoring goals, appearing in the match sheets, etc. And the last thing I was thinking about is that maybe they could challenge the basic principle of mutual trust and confidence between the contractual parties. As we know, the football players were one of the groups or stakeholders who weren't apparently aware of the whole Super League situation. No one consulted if they are for or against the whole concept. So in the end, in the worst scenario, they maybe could challenge the contract and terminate the contract, maybe on a just cause. What I was thinking about that is interesting, that if the Super League would happen, I don't think FIFA would like to be a governing body, and that they will let them to use RSDP, for example, because why would they? So in the end, it's really interesting who would deal with the possible disputes between the players and the clubs. We have no clue as about most of the things regarding Super League. And to answer your question about the free movement of workers, I actually do, because if we take a look at the European Union law, if the sports regulations are against the principle of free movement of workers, there must be the legitimate aim, and it can't be against the public policy. And I don't think this is the reason when they could survive the possible dispute, because in my opinion, there is so many ways how to get to the aim they were aiming to, and how to restrict the clubs to make the Super League, not by affecting the players, because in the end they weren't the stakeholders who caused the whole situation.
Thank you very much, Bara, for your answer. I would now like to ask Ms. Stoilova as well about some competition law questions, because there are some views, for example, that the creation of the European Super League might infringe EU competition rules as stated in Article 101 and 102 of the TFEU. And I was wondering whether you think that that can indeed be true, and if there is such an infringement of those articles, what consequences can there be for the European Super League creators?
Thank you, Michaela, for the question. definitely a very interesting topic. Just to preface it, if somebody's thinking about a thesis topic, I would definitely go for that. It's a great discussion. There are certainly rooms, plenty of rooms, for plenty of questions regarding the compatibility of the Super League with the EU competition law. And as we've seen them, most of us know, the main objective of EU competition law and its rules, especially when we think of them in line with the Super League, is to create an economic system that prevents those in a dominant market position, in this case it would be the company of the European Super League, from abusing their power and essentially eradicating competition for their own interests, both financial and sporting, if there's even any sporting interest in there. But when it comes to the Super League specifically, I see two possible situations of conflict between it and EU competition law. On one side, we have UEFA's threats for sanctions on clubs and players, and how, as we already discussed, they will violate internal market rules as well as fundamental freedoms of players. And as UEFA is in a dominant position, we all know, on the market, a dominant position, of course, is not a violation of Article 102, but the abuse of such dominant position would be a violation. And given the market power, FIFA and the share that it has on the European football market, UEFA, the share that it has on this European football market, it could easily lead to a violation of Article 102. But on the other hand, we also have the European Super League in the current structure that it was proposed, vaguely enough, because of course on the website there is 5 paragraphs in total explaining the whole Super League, and the rest is how the media has portrayed it, and maybe what Florentino has said. In this current structure, the Super League, essentially, as we were speaking before, as you were mentioning, Professor Van Eriken, that it is a closed shop league. It is a closed league. There is very little room for promotion and relegation. The whole participation structure in this league is now really based on sporting merit, which in itself will lead to potential violations of Article 101, Section 1 TFEU, as we know. And another interesting fact is also that some of the founding clubs, if not most of them, comprise half of the richest clubs in Europe. And by participating in such a closed league that excludes this sporting merit and the notion of such sporting merit, these elite clubs are there based on their power, influence, and financial ability, and are preventing smaller clubs from entering this league. This could also result in an Article 102 violation. But looking more closely to Article 101, Section 1, we have to bear in mind that, once again, it's formed by clubs with significant economic power. And the idea behind the Super League is to further their financial gain even more, as we've seen how sweet dear clubs like Real Madrid have lost so much during COVID, as if none of the other clubs have lost so much. But it's their overspending habits, in my opinion, that are funneling this whole idea of the Super League. But essentially it puts smaller clubs at a disadvantage, and they're already at a disadvantage when it comes to, for example, their ambitions to participate in UEFA club competitions because of the financial fair play regulations and the way that the break-even rule has created this uneven playing field where richer clubs that already generate more have the ability to spend more, and smaller clubs that are generating less and wishing to invest more when they qualify for UEFA club competitions cannot do so because they will violate the financial fair play regulations. So again, turning back to my point about competition law, this whole league would completely distort, in my opinion, any competition, both economic and sporting, at a national level, and to some extent at a European level. And even more, it would be very hard to justify the Super League and the effects that it has with the exemptions under Article 101, Section 3 TFEU. Because first of all, the organizers, the creators, would have to prove that this league contributes to the improving and the promoting of economic progress. But this is a very difficult stance to take, I think, because this league essentially will benefit economically, and perhaps maybe there will be some sporting progress for 20 clubs only. In Europe, there's more than 1,000 clubs. So where will the economic progress be for a small club from Bulgaria, for example, that has no chance of getting anywhere near the Super League? And their main ambitions, for example, are to qualify for Europa League or the Champions League. But turning to the second condition, which is the fair share of resulting benefits to consumers and what consumers receive, well, here it's a bit arguable because, in my opinion, I see the consumers, the final consumers, as the fans and the viewers essentially, but it is a category that may be fed up with watching Real Madrid play Chelsea 5 times on a yearly basis. And at that point, is there really a fair share of benefits that results for the consumers? I'm not sure. This is still an exemption that I'm questioning. But looking at the next condition, which was that the restrictions must be essential to achieving the objectives of the Super League. I thought about the objectives of the Super League and went on the website logically to find out more about it. What are the objectives? Preserving and saving European football, solidarity and sustainability. Well, there is some benefit from solidarity payments, of course. In the current structure, the way they have announced it, to me, it doesn't really seem realistic, because are they actually going to give these 10 billion to national associations? Which clubs are going to get these 10 billion? And for smaller clubs, it is not all money. It is true that money is a very important aspect in investing in youth development, in the stadiums, in the team as a whole, in the manager, and so on. But these clubs need the experience of playing with bigger clubs, stronger clubs with them, than them, and getting that confidence. Even if you're losing 0.404, there's still a benefit to playing with bigger clubs, getting to know how a team at a higher level is engaging in the game and what the strategies are. There's certain specifics, certain things that are very specific to football that money can't give. And it seems like these solidarity payments at this stage, the way that it was announced, were used more to justify their greed and to escape these accusations. And the funniest exception is the one that stipulates that this Super League should not give the parties any possibility to eliminate competition. Well, this is the whole fundamental structure of the Super League. Minimize competition for more financial gains for clubs that already have more than what other clubs have. And I was saying at a previous panel discussion we had last week, again on the Super League, that while we do live in a free market society and a world to a large extent, we also have to not forget this specific character of sport and the need to express and show in practice the solidarity with smaller clubs and help them grow together with the larger clubs. But to conclude and answer your question with a few sentences, given the information that we've gotten about the Super League at this stage, as vague as it is, and as much as we can gather together from information that came out in the media, I cannot say with 100% that the European Commission, if it was to assess the Super League as a project and as an organization under Articles 101 and then 102, would 100% certainly confirm that there is a violation. But I can definitely tell you that, in my opinion, there's a lot of questions that are arising and a lot of possible points of conflict. But if it is ever to materialize, the Super League, and if it ever goes into actually functioning, it will be interesting to see how the EU reacts to it.
Well, I actually wanted to ask you, thank you so much for your overview of the issues surrounding competition law. But I was also wondering if indeed the Super League creators can't fulfill those exemptions to escape the infringement under those articles, and they would be held liable for those infringements. What could be the consequences for the Super League, and who would be the body that would take? I think it probably the European Commission, but in what way would they be affected by that?
Thank you. To specify, perhaps an outcome would be a fine. And if the European Commission is really mad at them and their proposed project, perhaps even a ban. And if the European Commission gets the support of UEFA and FIFA, because we know there have been attempts to, so to say, in line with the financial fair play, to exempt them from European Commission assessment, but the European Commission has confirmed for certain things that they will not step in there and assess football regulations. For FFP, it has not specified that. So it could happen in the same way that the European Commission does not grant a complete exemption to the Super League, but says, if you want this to function, change this and that, and we're not going to take action. But I think perhaps a fine would do the Super League justice, and we'll see how it goes, if it goes there. Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much. And now I would like to ask another question to Ms. Strakova, because Prime Minister Boris Johnson in the UK stated that the European Super League might amount to being a cartel that would be against the same principles of competition, and he even threatened to use a legislative bomb to stop it. But what is the role of states in regulating sport leagues, and how could they do it? and especially in the case of the Super League?
Thank you for the question again. So, yeah, Mr. Johnson's statement was pretty brave, in my opinion. As he said, he's going to put a legislative bond. I think we all know that legislation process takes some time, and he can't really threaten with changing everything by changing the law. And when I took a closer look at it, especially in the UK case, they could go both ways. They could go in the way of the national level, which is there's a governing body, Competition and Markets Authority, which could seek to prevent a monopoly, which would be created by the Super League. Or even though we know there was Brexit, it could all go also on the European Union level, about which was Vesela talking before, and the European Commission would investigate literally in the same line as the Competition and Markets Authority. There is also the option of the human rights law in the UK, but there is a problem that so the cost would harm to an individual or group, even if we're talking about clubs, players, anyone in this case, the harm must be committed by a governmental body, which Super League is definitely not. And when I was thinking, or when I was reading what the UK or any other country could in practice do, there could be, for example, the change of governance. In the UK, the sport is self-regulated, so they could try to change the system and the governance of the sports. For example, in France, the sporting activity is a public service. So if PSG would go for Super League, the sanctions could be applied by the football associations, which would act in behalf of the governance. So the enforcement and everything would be much easier than in the case of the UK or Spain. But I think that it would cause so much trouble, and it would get the things so more complicated if they would change the governance in football. Maybe other sports would like to change the governance in football, and we have no clue where would it lead. So the next option is to change the system of the ownership of the clubs. For example, in Germany, we know that there is like 51% of the clubs are owned by fans. So it also makes the governance different because the fans have their voice. But also, again, I don't think you can change a thing like this over the night. There would have been a consent of the fans of the clubs. So I don't think the UK governance has the power or the support of other groups to do that. They also threatened that they wouldn't give the working visa or permits to foreign players, which could really go wrong because we know that there is no legitimate aim to do this. I think from my point of view, it's very unproportional, and it would cause more trouble than help in this case. And the last thing they could do would be the withdrawing of funding, which in my opinion would affect the smaller clubs more than the bigger clubs. So it wouldn't really resolve anything. And the smaller clubs who would be in trouble anyway would just get in the worst position. So I personally think that sport is something that's specific and it should be self-regulated, but in the borders of the law. So if the sports bodies go outside of this scope, the government or the anyone who thinks that they're outside of the law should ask the state to step in. As we saw, for example, here in Madrid, the commercial court already did the preliminary ruling, or put the things to the next level and go to the European Union level, but basically said if the sporting bodies are not outside of this scope, I don't think the government should step in.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rakova. And indeed, because the European Court of Justice now has received this the case about FIFA. Now the court will try to decide whether FIFA or the Super League can indeed impose those sanctions or have that exclusive right over organizing sport competitions. And so I would like to ask Mr. Van Ekeren if he, what position does he believe that, do you believe that the European Court of Justice will actually adopt, and whether it would grant that exclusive right of organizing sport competitions to FIFA or UEFA, and would legally allow those bodies to actually stop the European Super League from being formed?
Well, thank you for this good but also very difficult question, at least for me to answer. I also feel a bit insecure, I have to say, with all these legal experts around here, which I am not. I know a little bit about the governance of sport and the impact of sport, but not so much about the legal aspect. But here, I think we see that, and I also recall this from the previous speakers. This is a very interesting, but also very complex legal case for the sport or the football governing bodies here. They don't know what they can do and what they can't do. They have to deal with the European law. They have to deal with the state law. I mean, even this week, UEFA couldn't suspend Real Madrid, Barcelona, or Juventus because of an injunction by a Spanish court. And they don't know what to do, so they have to postpone their decision on this. And as a consequence, there's still no Champions League ban or a heavy fine for these clubs yet. So they are looking with their lawyers for all different kind of solutions. And again, I'm not a lawyer, but if I listen well to the legal experts, and the only thing I can conclude is that we might just be witnessing the start of a long legal process with a very uncertain outcome. Maybe the other experts can say something more about it. But to me, the whole debate actually about the Super League seems to be about this question: who owns football? And this is not only a legal question, actually. This is not only a governance question. This is also a cultural question, right? And so who owns the club? Is it the owners, the sponsors, the media, UEFA, FIFA, the fans? Which fans, like I've mentioned before? So I think it's merely about this question. And what we do know is that seen from the reaction from the fans, the managers, and the players, I mean that those reactions they were sufficient, at least for the English clubs, and swiftly followed by some of the Italian clubs, to back away from the Super League. And maybe I'm naive, but this may be an example of consumers and employees being more powerful than the law, if at least they are stirred into some kind of coordinated action. And so I'm not sure if I can give a clear answer to your question, but anyway, for me, the whole idea of the Super League of some sort seems unlikely to have gone away forever, except from these fights in the courts right now and outside the courts. But you know, the talks about a European Super League are not new. They are around us since the 1980s. I mean, actually, the Champions League is one of the consequences because of this debate. So it will, in my opinion, it will continue. And this will be a battle, you know, to access to funds, media rights, and they will continue. So I'm not sure how this fight will end in court, but I'm sure this was not the last thing we've heard from some kind of initiative to raise some kind of Super League.
Thank you very much, Mr. Van Ekeren. And now I would like to ask our last question to Ms. Stoilova and Mr. Raval, because the creators of the Super League indeed claim that they want to reform football in a way, and they believe that that can only be done by creating more matches. So in order to make it sustainable, it should generate more matches, it can only be done to creating this other competition. But what do you believe that are some of the hurdles that football currently faces, and is indeed the creation of the Super League a proper way to address them? If you could answer, perhaps Ms. Stoilova can be the first.
Thank you. It's an interesting question because we were speaking about culture earlier. Professor Van Ekeren was mentioning culture, and that's something that is very close to me because when I looked at, let me preface it the other way. When I looked at the Florentino Perez statement, the translation of it, of course, I saw several little phrases that touched something inside of me and that generally made me mad. The first thing is, I quote, "Here at Real Madrid, we've lost a lot of money." Yes, but is it only Real Madrid that has lost money? No. The Super League will save the clubs financially. Which clubs? The ones that can sell more TV rights through the Super League at outrageous prices that the consumer will suffer after, and also smaller clubs. Generally, I think it will help clubs, the big ones, because they have also an overspending habit. Selling a player for 222 million euros. I think it's a bit too much at this point. Have they become, I don't know, rockets that have to be sent to space? There is certain value to the services and the effort and the hard work of athletes that has to be appreciated, but also things need to be kept within the realm of reality. Because like Mr. Van Ekeren said before, there have been talks of Super League for years, and even more precisely, there were leaks of emails around 2018, I believe it was, where there was already that discussion of the Super League, how to organize it, which clubs to participate, which definitely leads me to believe that the financial greed and the need for more and more money started years ago, and COVID was just an accelerator and helped to launch the whole project faster than what it did. But what we saw, it's not like it came out of nowhere. It was announced a bit out of nowhere because the news was just dropped at the doorstep, and then they all left about their business, and Florentino did a little interview to explain a little bit more about it. But Mr. Perez also mentioned the loss of interest in football. And perhaps I have a bit different explanation about the loss of interest in football. There's different opinions, I believe, in that. I don't think there's one straightforward answer as to why there has been a decrease in interest in football. But my explanation lies precisely in culture and in the development of the young generation. Because when I was young, I'm not that old, but when I was little, most of the boys, at least in my city, in my country, would say, "Oh, I want to become a football player." But that's because there was the culture of, when you go outside, when your parents take you outside to the park, boys would play football, girls would play with dolls or with flowers or something like that. Nowadays, this has been replaced by video games. I don't take me as a hater, so to say, of the esports industry, but children are playing more together with one another online than what they are outside on the street. Also, COVID-19 was once again an aggravating factor where all the kids had to stay at home, learn at home, be social at home, if that's even possible. And that's where the culture, I believe, is disappearing slowly. The culture of playing football, growing as a young sports person, as a young athlete, as a young football player, even if you don't become the best in the world. Once I think a child is born and fed and bred with football, they kind of become a fan. Then there's the idea of attending stadiums. Sometimes there's people that say tickets to go to the stadium have become so expensive that why even bother paying the money when mom or dad have already paid for the TV subscription? I can just watch it on the TV on the couch while eating popcorn or whatever there is to eat. Then there's also generally the idea that football has become, it's not even an idea, I think it's more of a fact that football has become more of a business rather than just sport. It's normal. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but there's a certain limit to it. And if we turn to the American model, where football culture is very different, soccer culture, I should say, it's very different from what there is in Europe. Going to the stadium there is more of going on a family trip where we can eat hot dogs, drink soda, and in the meantime, in the back, there's perhaps a soccer game, but who cares really about the soccer game? Whereas in Europe, we have this culture when you go to the stadium to see maybe just see Liverpool or something. It's all about sport. It's all about the sporting merit. It's all about the sport results, and that's what's important. And that's what I think we have to maintain, not lose. And whether the Super League will solve it, I don't think so. I think, like I said, we'll solve some of the financial issues of big clubs. The promise of redistributing 10 billion euros in solidarity at this moment, to me, is just an empty promise because there's very little information. It's so vague. It was literally just dropped at our doorsteps, and it was like, do whatever you would want with this information. But for now, that is it. And I think if one is to launch such a big project that distorts so much the whole idea of football in Europe, it needs to be done in a very persuasive way. It needs to be explained very well. If you wish, there almost has to be a business plan presented to fans, which are very important stakeholders, because like you were saying earlier, we saw the reaction of fans. It was outrageous. It was the biggest gathering of different stakeholders all together to oppose a project that they don't like, that they don't want. And that's what's powerful. That's what shows me that there's still that European football culture remaining within us and that we should preserve it. Thank you for your question. I think I've taken enough of the time.
Thank you very much for your answer, and Mr. Raval, if you could provide your opinion as well.
Yeah, so many things to tackle there. I think one of the areas that's been tackled before is that the ownership of football, and I think in a sense there's so many things in this debate that there's that legal standpoint, and in effect that I think that sort of detracts from the emotional aspect of sport and the emotion that unites sport and makes sport so great. Is that people get these emotions, and that this can be discussed in a bar, it can be discussed like this. It's discussed in parliaments around Europe because of what happened, etc. And the interesting thing is the debate as to whether or not there was supposed to be more matches, less matches, quality of matches, and how we look at that. And one of the issues that there was is that this has been coming for a long time. I mean, for a long time there's been this summer tournament called the International Champions Cup, where top European teams go around the world, literally around the world. They play some games in Asia, they play same games in the United States, and this is exactly the same numbers of teams that were going to eventually create the European Super League. This has been there for a long, long time, and that Champions Cup is very complex. Teams don't play each other, and they all emerge somewhere along the line as a winner. And my team, as I mentioned before, Arsenal, we didn't participate. Our coach believed it was better for our players to focus on being fit, train in a quiet camp in Austria, and focus on that. And financially, we were left behind. And when that coach left, Arsene Wenger, we then participated in the Champions Cup and traveled to Asia, traveled to the United States, and got off to the worst start of the season ever because everybody was tired. And so this has been there for a long time. I don't think this was dropped on our plate unsuspectedly. There was a discussion going on in UEFA about the Champions League format, and more teams are going to enter the Champions League next year. Still no place for my team, never mind, but there's more teams that are going to enter it next year, and that's the crux of the problem. Too many smaller teams from smaller countries are entering, and the players from the bigger teams potentially could get injured. And that's where bigger clubs are saying, okay, can we not have these games, please? The armchair fan, the one that is watching online, streaming across the world, is interested in watching Real Madrid versus Chelsea 5 times a year. We're not, because that's not how we've grown up. We like the David and Goliath. We like the romantic element of football, where a small team from nowhere can suddenly raise and become, this great champion. It happens very, very rarely, though, to be fair. It really does. This year we have two new teams in the Champions League final, but look at how much money both of those teams have spent. I mean, let's not romanticize this. So I think that somewhere along the line, we've seen a clash of different cultures, not just the country cultures, but ownership models. In Spain, of course, don't forget, every kid wants to grow up and play for Barcelona or Real Madrid. And as sad as this is going to sound, every other club is a feeder club for those two. They will literally buy the young talent out and then loan it, just so that they can get hold of that talent. And so Florentino has been dominant across this for a long, long time. And that feeder club thing is how I think he felt that would be how they would feed the lower ranks of the pyramid. Everybody's a feeder club to Real Madrid in Spain or Barcelona. And across Europe, that would be the way this has been there. Chelsea have done it. Roman Abramovich bought players so that the other teams didn't buy them. Now, that eventually financial fair play was supposed to stop that. But I'm sorry, as an Arsenal fan, financial fair play did not stop Man City. So UEFA have their teeth, but they put them away as well when they don't need them. So I'm not sure the laws will get into it. I think the fundamental question is football will change, and it will change soon. And the fact that kids aren't maybe going out and playing football on the street, they're also watching on their computers as well, and they're talking about this as well on their. So we need to look at how we re-engage fans into that. Fans don't own the clubs. They never have. Yes, there was this massive movement. I think Corona probably was an impact in that to stop the Super League, but it hasn't gone away. There's no way this has gone away. It will come back. and I'm convinced that until we look at why players or clubs are kind of stuck in this rut, nothing, this discussion will permanently be there, and that big clubs want to be part of it. That's also why in England clubs joined it. They didn't want to be left behind. You've got to question some of them as to whether they should have even been there, i.e. Tottenham Hotspur, but they don't want to be left behind. Simple as that. Leicester deserve to be there more than Tottenham, possibly even more than Arsenal.
Thank you very much, Mr. Raval. If any of our other speakers have any comments on the subject, feel free to state them, or otherwise, if the audience has maybe any questions for the speakers, we would be happy to receive some questions. And if not, then we might conclude our event. It has been a pleasure to hear from you, and it has been a pleasure to just discuss all of these issues and the legal problems as well. I would like to thank you all for participating and for listening. And you can find the recording of this conference on our YouTube channel, the channel for the Global Governance team. Wish you a wonderful day, and thank you very much again.